Hi, my name is Kyle Mayer, and I'm an associate editor at the Academy of Management Review. I'd like to talk to you about how you know when you have enough in your AMR paper. How you know that you've done enough to get it through and have a great idea that you put out there to the world. Starting with the foundation. The first place to start here is to think about what is the foundational theory that you're trying to build onto. Sometimes you're just extending one theory, which is totally fine. You're taking a new take on it, adding a different assumption, questioning an assumption, but you're doing something where you're building on one primary theory. That's totally fine. Sometimes you're using two theories. Maybe using one to extend another, you have a core and another one's being added to that. Different things you might want to do to think about how you can bring two theories together to add new insight. If you're going to add a third theory in there, now you're using three theories as part of what you're trying to do, you need to start being careful, because the more theories you add as the foundation, the more complexity you're adding to what you're trying to do, and the more challenging it's going to be to create a good, coherent contribution in 30 pages. So 3 would be a real maximum in terms of number of theories that you're trying to build upon. And even then, don't go deep into all 3. Have a primary 1 preferably, or at most 2, maybe just bring in some nuances from a third possibly to bring that in. But you need a strong foundation to make a paper work. So you need to clearly identify where the gap is that you're going to address. But if its foundation is too large, you won't be able to complete that house in 30 pages and really make a contribution in that period, in that amount of space. So the second thing is, which leads us to the next point, which is what exactly is the nature of your intended contribution? What are you trying to do precisely? So the nature of a theoretical contribution can vary widely. There is no one size fits all. But you need to think about what exactly you are adding to what conversation. So you have to be clear, as we talked about before at the foundation, identify the conversation that you're adding to, but also really what are you adding and what is the content of that contribution. And you have to really think carefully about how much of a contribution you're trying to try and put into the paper. I mean, too little, you don't move the needle enough to get a contribution. Too much, you need a book, not 30 pages. So you got to find that sweet spot in the middle where you can have a nice chunk that you can say, here's how I am moving the needle with this conversation. And I can do that in a coherent way in 30 pages. That's what you're trying to break off. There's no one way to do it. But then you have to think about how are you going to do that? So then when you think about how much can I do in 30 pages, you get into, okay, what do I need to do in those 30 pages to make a contribution? First off, what are the relationships between the variables that you're trying to explain? All right. You really got to understand, you can't just say, okay, A leads to B, okay, great. A should lead to more of B, more of A should lead to more of B. Great, why? You need to clarify the mechanisms that drive the relationships in your paper. Clearly state those. Don't beware of the implicit assumption. Don't leave the assumption in your head and expect the reader to just know. You got to get everything on the page to explain, to get the reader on board with where you are, so they understand why A should lead to B in this kind of situation, or be moderated by C, or whatever it might be. Which brings to the larger issue of just be careful clarifying your assumptions in general. Many papers have been derailed because they have too many assumptions that they're building in there. They don't properly explain or connect back to the theory or what they're trying to do. And also, have you clarified what the boundary conditions are for your theory? It's very rare that some kind of situation is going to work everywhere. So you got to think about carefully about what are you trying to do, where it's just going to work, clarify what you want and what conditions are going to be necessary to see these kinds of effects. Another part of this is, how do you kind of explain all of this? So many people use propositions. You don't have to. So propositions are not required in a theory paper. But if you're going to use propositions, don't go too crazy with them. You use enough that you need to explain what you're trying to do, but don't end up with 10, 15, 20 propositions. That's going to be too many to really fully explain through this. And the propositions should be really clearly linked to the theory that you're developing. And I think that's a really key thing with the paper is that it have that, when you know it's done when it has that flow, body of theory, the mechanisms and the explanation, the propositions just flow really nicely with one another, and they create a set of ideas that are clear to understand and make a contribution. And when you get to that discussion of implications and you're thinking about what does all this mean, you need to understand and explain what this means for theory. What questions can we address now because of what you've done that we couldn't address before? And also, what are the implications in terms of understanding an important phenomenon of what this means for practice? So we clearly want to have that focus on theory and what's getting added to theory, but also think about what this means for practice a little bit, to think about what the implications are there too. Don't spend pages upon pages, thinking about too much about this, but you do need to explain why it matters, what we can do now that we couldn't do before. And that's when you know you have a good paper. Foundation, clear theories that you're going to be building upon, clearly what you're adding to those, why that's important and what it means for theory. What can we do now that we couldn't do before? Now you got a nice AMR paper, send it out for review. Take care and good luck. Have a great day.